Hello everyone and welcome back to another Wizard 101 video. Now today isn't really a Wizard 101 video per se, and you might recognize this video if you've watched me for over a year or so. Basically it's been quite a few months now, I did a video called Mapping Out the Worlds of the Spiral, and basically what I did, for any that are curious, I basically took a map and then detailed where every world in the spiral was. Now, I did this based off of prior knowledge, what I've looked up on the internet over the years, and all that jazz, and ultimately I decided I would do it again for two reasons. One, it was one of my favorite videos I've ever actually done. I know that it wasn't like exactly the most popular video I've ever recorded, but I actually really enjoyed doing it because I am a huge geography and history nerd. I should amend that. And then a few other things. First off, that was before I edited, so I figured I would do it and make it a little bit more condensed, a little bit better. And also, I picked a much higher quality world map this time, so I can actually zoom in and it doesn't look like a cluttered mess in the different things. So you can see I got like a very high resolution map here this time to go for it. So without further ado, let's get started. I actually have a list of worlds pulled up here. Not only Wizard 101 worlds, but worlds in the spiral. So basically what I'm going to be doing is taking each of the worlds in the spiral and then mapping it out on a map where exactly it is based on. So without further ado, let's get started. So right off the bat, we have a little bit of a problem. Wizard City is not based on anything in particular. I would say that there isn't anything exactly that it represents. You could say it just represents like American. I know that this is really small, but I'll make it a little bit bigger and zoom in on that. You could say it's representing of just like American like magical folk tales and schools and whatnot, but realistically we don't know. You could say it's based on Harry Potter, so it should be in Britain, but realistically I would say that there's nothing too concrete for this, so I'm just gonna move it into Purgatory, which is going to be the North Pole, and I'll put this in a black outline so you can see it. Wizard City will be in the North Pole because I have literally nowhere else to put it. Next up in the worlds is Krokotopia. Krokotopia is obviously based on Egypt, and specifically ancient Egypt. There's many draws between the Jewish people and the Manders and the Krokotopians and the Egyptians. Slave society thing went down there, which I guess by that logic, we are Moses. Interesting thought, the wizard is Moses. But without a doubt, it's based on Krokotopia, whether it be from like the pyramids, the Krokosphinx based on the actual Sphinx. It's just very obviously based on Egypt. Next up on our list is Marleybone. Now, Marleybone is very obviously based on Britain. Now, I would like to say I need to actually make this really small because I need full room for multiple worlds later on, because there is actually a few based in Britain. But this one specifically is based on somewhere between Victorian and Edwardian England, which, if you are curious on the years in that, that's from about 1836 to about 1914 or so. It's based on around that era of Britain, and you could tell based on the very high society, posh British dogs, mixed with the expeditions that they were doing at the time, mixed with really a lot of things, just kind of how society was at the time. And definitely, like, you can't even say Marleybone is not based on Britain. Next up on our list, I'm actually going to put Wysteria. Wysteria isn't really based on anything in particular, but I would say that it's definitely without a doubt based on Harry Potter, and Harry Potter, specifically Hogwarts, is in Scotland in the books, so I'm just gonna put it right here in Scotland. We don't exactly know where it is. There you go. Wysteria's Scotland. That's the best I got for you. Next up, and I'm putting this in now because you would do it around level 30, which is a bit after Wysteria, I have Aquila. Now, Aquila, if you don't know, I feel like you would be hard-pressed not to know, is based on ancient Greece, and specifically Greek mythology. You have all of these mythical heroes. In Pyre 101, you have like Aegiales, you have who's based on Achilles, you have who is Agamemnon. I don't know who they replace Agamemnon with. I don't remember what his name is, but obviously there's Aegiales, and then there's just the obvious ones like Zeus, Poseidon, Hades. based on real Greek mythology. Next up on our list is Mooshu. Now, Mooshu is a difficult one. It always has been a difficult one for me because it's actually kind of a mix of a few. I've seen arguments either way. I've seen arguments that it is Chinese. I've seen arguments that it's Japanese. But knowing what I do about both cultures and both histories, I actually have to say it's kind of a mix between the two. For example, Buddhism and the Buddha, specifically in this case Muda, is a very Chinese principle. Obviously, Buddhism was very widely popular in China, and I think it still is very widely popular in China, over Japan, where that isn't really the major religion there. On top of that, there's stuff like the Jade Champion and the Jade Palace. Jades were very much a representation of royalty in China for a lot of years, and that definitely fits. On the flip side, though, is that there are samurai and warlords, and in Pirate 101, I believe there's even daimyos and the Yakuza. Those are all very Japanese things. So instead, I'm just going to get a thing here, title it Mooshu, and then just like make it really big and put it in Asia, because you could say it's literally just a mix of Japanese and Chinese. I know some people won't exactly agree with that. I know because in the past people have not agreed with that, but I would say firmly that that is what I think, and I think that's what it actually is. You could disagree with me, but I'm right and you're wrong. So checkmate. Moving on. Next, we're going to move up here. I kind of forgot it, but we're going to move to Grizzleheim. Now, Grizzleheim is very obviously based on the Nordic countries, specifically being Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. It's based on the Viking culture of the 800s and the 700s, 800s, Viking Age, all that. Very obviously, it's just based on that. I don't really need to go too far in depth of that. I'm sure even the most unknowledgeable person about history could have guessed that Grizzleheim was based on Viking. Next up, we have Dragonspyre. Now, Dragonspyre, I would say, is a little bit difficult because it's not really based entirely on a real-world place, but what I'd like to think, first off, the first hint is the Russian accents and the highly militaristic society. It's supposed to be a representation of some kind of Russian society. I wouldn't say specifically it's supposed to be of the Soviet Union, but I would say that it's probably a bit more representative of just Russian society as a whole in the earlier days. It's not exactly based on Russia. There's definitely some, twists and turns to it, but you could say, in kind of like a headcanon, it's based on Russia if like there was a nuclear fallout, which kind of is what happens in with the Dragon Titan. So you could say that. So before I move on, there's actually one thing I need to do first, because I kind of need to relate a few worlds to each other geographically to kind of understand them, and I kind of want you to go through my thought process. So I'm going a little bit out of order here, but it's important to kind of stick with it right now. So first off, I will map out Skull Island. Skull Island is the main hub in Pirate 101. It's where all the piratey things happen, where the plunder and loot abound. But it is very obviously based on the Caribbean. In our history, the Caribbean was mainly where pirates were based out of. Surprise, surprise. If you've watched the Pirates of the Caribbean movie, that could be why it's titled that. Or if you've played Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag, the Caribbean islands, specifically islands down here like the Barbados and Havana was kind of a hub for it. Basically, a lot of these mini islands down here in the Caribbean were a kind of hive for pirates and piracy, which is definitely why Skull Island is based off of it. Now, what is in relation to this, in Skull Island, there is also a bunch of water moles. Water moles are a kind of tribal people that live in, I don't know if it's peace, but they live with the pirates in the same universe. Now, why this is important is that in Wizard 101, we actually see water moles as well, which they are on a thing called the floating land. It is the land part of Celestia. Now, I don't know if you see where I'm going with this exactly, but I'm saying that that part of Celestia, the floating land, is very likely either next to or in Skull Island. So what I'm gonna say here is that I think Celestia, which is a sunken civilization, a sunken city, similar to Atlantis, is actually right here in the Atlantic Ocean, funny enough. Atlantis, Atlantic. Next up, and this is also related to another world, is Azteca. Now, I would like to say Azteca is very obviously in Mexico based on where the Aztecs were in our history. But why I group it with these three is in Skull Island, you actually visit a group of Aztecs. And what I want to mention specifically here is that it makes sense that Skull Island would be here in the Caribbean and Azteca would be here in around Mexico, that you would go to, say, an Aztecan tribe in Skull Island because of the proximity. And in our real life history, there was definitely some Aztec presence along a lot of this Mexican peninsula, also up here in the Yucatan. And in the Yucatan, surprise, surprise, it is extremely close to the Caribbean and Cuba and Skull Island, and you can bet that there were native Aztecs on both islands. At least they visited it. That is really the end of these three worlds. I just wanted to link them all together and give you my kind of thought process. I developed that theory a while ago, and I always really get giddy just kind of sharing it because I think it's really fun. I'm sorry if this video isn't interesting to you, but to me, it's really interesting because I am a total history and geography nerd. Like, you could probably see it makes me really happy just to talk about. Since we skipped around a little bit, let's go back in order. We did Celestia. Next is Zafaria. Now, Zafaria is without a doubt based on the tribes of Africa. It's very, very obviously based on African tribes, and I would say specifically in this case, it was probably based on the Zulu tribes, because in our history, the British went to war with them in the 19th century, imperialism and all that. It was obviously horrid. We can directly relate this to in Zafaria with the Zebu dynasty. If you remember, there's Shaka Zebu, who could be based on Shaka Zulu. Wow, that's a strange connection to make, but that would be my number one reason for placing Zafaria down here in southern Africa, around where I believe the Zulu tribe was. Next up on our list is Avalon, and this is exactly why I left myself a little bit of space in Britain, because Avalon is also based on Britain, specifically England and I believe it would be Anglo-Saxon England. So this was back prior to the Norman conquest. If you don't know, I'm going to just vastly simplify it. Basically, a dude here named William the Bastard at the time, later known as William the Conqueror, sailed across the English Channel and conquered England, changing the country as we know it. If he hadn't done that, we would speak a completely different language and a Germanic language rather than a Greek/Latin based language. But that is a little bit regardless. Sorry, that was just a history tangent. I'm going to go on those. I am very sorry. Avalon is based on specifically Arthurian England and Arthurian legend, which is based around, I would say, the 700-800s in England. Basically, there was the legend of King Arthur, his sword Excalibur. Obviously, in Wizard 101, King Artorias and the Sword of Kings. Fun fact, there was also the Wizard of Arthur, who was named Merlin, obviously Merle Ambrose, and just overall, it's based on England. I can't really go in depth. I could probably talk about this all day, but I'm going to spare your brains and just end it at that. Next up on our list, and this is a real hard one, is Khrysalis. Now, Khrysalis is difficult because I would say it is not really based on anything. The only thing I could maybe say is that it could be based on Australia, because some of the bugs have more Australian type accents. Obviously, Australia is known for having terrifying bug monsters, but also there is the ruined Alcazar, which is a prison, and Australia was originally a prison as a penal colony. There's also the fact that there's like the Conda Desert portion, then there's the Last Wood, which would be the more green parts of Australia. That's really all I could say. I would say maybe, I'm just gonna put it here with a question mark. Really, it could be anywhere. I would say I'm not exactly happy with the Australia guess, but really, I don't think you can put it anywhere else. Next up, we have Darkmoor. Darkmoor is a world. It's where Dorgan is from. And based on real life, it's actually based on Transylvania. Now, Transylvania isn't exactly this like mythic legend of vampires and stuff. Basically, there was a dude named Vlad the Impaler in like the 15th century, and he stabbed a bunch of people on spikes. That was that. That's where the whole Vlad vampire thing comes from. He wasn't really a vampire, obviously, but there is some vampiric legend. Darkmoor is based on Transylvania and the whole Transylvanian thing because of the whole dark vampire-y vibe. Transylvania is in modern day Romania. Right here, you can kind of you can make out the borders of Romania if you want here, something like this. Yeah, there you go. A very beautiful looking Romania, but Darkmoor is in this part, which is Transylvania. Next up, we have Polaris. Now, Polaris is very obviously heavily based on France and the French Revolution. Specifically, there's the Bastille, which is very obviously based on the real Bastille, which was stormed during the Revolution in the capital of Paris. There's obviously Empress, what's her name? Something, Empress Marie Antoinette, which is based on Marie Antoinette. Very obvious connections to the French Revolution there. I would like to say, though, there's actually some connections to the Russian Revolution as well. I don't really know why they did both, but obviously there is Rasputin, based on real-life Rasputin, who kind of was ganked and murdered by a bunch of dudes for being a really badass wizard, who also slept with some people's wives. That's irrelevant. There is that. Obviously, Ivan is a very, very Russian name, and I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe Baba Yaga is actually a Russian legend. Okay, it's Slavic folklore, so yes, it is Slavic, which Slavic is basically all of these areas, including Russia. So it's a little bit of a mix of both. Obviously, I would say a lot of it is based on France specifically, but there is a reasonable argument to say that a lot of it is based on Russia as well. So let me know what you think in the comments. I think it could be either. I'm just going to put it in France, but it could do in both. Next, we have Mirage. Mirage, one of my favorite worlds, is heavily based on Persia, and that is modern day Iran. We have Mirage down here, a beautiful, beautiful world. Obviously, you can just make a lot of connections from how they dress to the mercantile merchant kind of society that they have, the sprawling markets, all that, and then just the sand if you want to. Basically, Mirage is very obviously based on Persia, I would say. Next, we have Empyrea. Now, last time I didn't really know where to put this, but I would say after redoing it a few times and kind of knowing a bit more about it, I would say that I can pretty confidently say Empyrea is a little bit based on South America at the very least. I'm not gonna say that it is entirely based on it. It's very hard to say, but I feel like a few people made a good argument that it could be based on like Peruvian jungles, with the area jungle and aerial shore. Definitely gives some vibes. Xanadu sounds vaguely South American, you could say, but obviously the world is kind of an amalgamation of some things. You can't without a doubt say it's South America, but you can say that it's at least part of it is based on South America. Next up, we have Karamelle. Now, Karamelle, I would say, is a little bit of a mix. People commented last time that it could be a few places. I would say, based on my knowledge and based on what I know, it is just kind of vaguely in this region. It's very heavily based on Germany, on Switzerland, and on Austria. All three of those countries very much give me Karamelle vibes, or Karamelle gives me their vibes, from how they dress, to the accent, to simply, you know, the vibe of the world. You could argue more of a case for Switzerland, because Switzerland has obviously a heavily candy producing society, specifically chocolate. You may know Swiss chocolate It is one of the most, supposedly one of the best chocolates in the world. You could say that there's a reason why Karamelle's based on that. I'm just gonna put it there. Also, I don't know why these black lines appear. I noticed them a little bit earlier. They just kind of exist. I don't know why. I think it's because of how big the picture is, but I'm just gonna ignore them and move on. Next, we have Lemuria. Now, Lemuria is a bit hard. I've always said it's hard, and it's even harder now that I know what it was. Last time when I just said it could be based on Lemuria, which was a real theory that there was an 8th continent right here in between the in between India and Africa in the Indian Ocean, but nowadays I can't really say much of it at all because it is actually an amalgamation of worlds, right? You could say Khrysalis, which is based on potentially Australia, I don't know. You could say it's based on, you know, Celestia with the water moles. You could really say a lot of things, so I'm just going to tentatively put it in the same spot again, because I really don't know. Now we're moving on to some of the more fun worlds, specifically, well, obviously, by fun, I just mean, like, different. We have Pirate 101. First off, we're starting with Monquista. Monquista is very obviously based on the Spanish Empire, whether it be from the horrible management system. If you remember, when we go to Monquista, a bunch of governors get switched out really fast. That is a very common thing with Spain, and specifically the Spanish Empire down here in South America. And you also have the royalty. You have a bunch of Isabellas and Ferdinands, which are based on the many Isabellas and Ferdinands of Spain in our time. I can't really stress enough just how much Monquista is based on that. And fun fact, when do we see Monquistans in Wizard 101? We see them in Azteca. And if you don't know, a group of Spanish people in our history landed in around, I believe it was the Aztecs. I could be thinking of the Incans, but either way, it is a relevant tale in this case. They landed in one of those indigenous tribes and brought with them a disease. And obviously the natives not resistant to that disease because they've never encountered it before. It spread like wildfire, and Spain, with a group of, I believe it was 300 men, 400 men, was able to take over all of, I think it was the Incan Empire, with just those men, millions of people, simply because they were entirely ravaged by that disease. It's a very sad piece of history, but a piece of history that's relevant since we see them in Azteca, and something I would just like to mention. Next up, we have Cool Ranch, and Cool Ranch is a fun one because Cool Ranch is actually the first one that I would say is solidly based off the United States. It is very obviously based on cowboys and the outlaws and the Wild Wild West. The Wild West in our time is actually kind of like a little bit of a myth, but it is more, there was obviously a bunch of outlaws and kind of your stereotypical cowboys in the Midwest to the west of America in the early 1800s to the late 1800s. So I would say Cool Ranch is very obviously based on that. You could just tell immediately it's based on that. It's just kind of fun. Next on our list, and the final one from Pirate 101, is Valencia. Valencia is, in my opinion, very obviously based on the Roman Empire in a way. You can't exactly say that, but first off, the names of Valencian are very, very Roman. Like, I don't remember exactly, I can't name a lot of them, but there was like a lot of them, like Septimus and stuff like that. Very stereotypical, like Roman-esque names. There's that. There's also the very disciplined and structured empire kind of system that Valencia had going, which was pretty cool if I do say so myself. So I would definitely place them around there, around Rome. So that's really it for all of the major ones. You can see them here. They might be hard to read in some places, but that's really it for the major ones. I kind of forgot I stuck Wizard City up here in Antarctica. Some other, like, minor names, you could say. I'm not really going to put them on the map, and I'm not going to talk about them too much because there's no point. Albion, which is where Bonnie Ann's from in Pirate 101, is actually part of a skyway in Pirate 101, and specifically Marleybone, which makes me think it's based on Scotland, which we could already kind of tell from Bonnie Ann's accent. Albion, funny fact, is actually the old name for England, and I know it's still I think it's still called that somewhere, but basically I would put Albion up here in Scotland. Raja is also mentioned, would go here in India, very obviously based on India. Wallaroo is mentioned by the crackhead balance professor in the Arcanum. That firmly goes in Australia. And I would say that's really it as far as I know off the top of my head. I think there's some other worlds mentioned, but they're very, very minor and very, very hard. Like, there's, Iago is mentioned at some point. You could say El Dorado is mentioned. That would be based on South America, if you count that as a world. Technically, the Arcanum doesn't count as a world, I would say, because it's kind of more like a space station than anything. Really, I would say that that's it. That's what I would say for this, and this is a finished map for me. Oh boy, I have a video to edit down. This is 35 minutes long. I hope I can cut this down to at least 25. Hopefully, if not, you guys are going to have a long ass video that many people probably aren't going to watch, but history nerds will probably like and enjoy spotting the history references you get. Let me know in the comments below, actually, how much of this did you understand? Did you understand the history, or did you just listen to me nerd out for about 30 minutes? Let me know. But otherwise, that is it. Thank you all for watching. If you made it this far, God, I don't know how you made it this far, but congratulations to you. Yeah, make sure to drop a like, hit the sub button, go support me financially on Patreon, and thank you to the NJA for supporting me for $25 a month. Really appreciate it. And finally, go join my Discord server. Really cool, thriving place there. We're about to reach 400 members. Pretty pog. But that's it for today. Thank you all for watching. I will see you in the next video. Adios.